those are some pretty good worn down tires. This side isn't any better. Pretty much when one groove is gone, you need to change them. And when they're on the nose and they're close together on the same axle, it's always a good idea to change them all together. Another Challenger 300, it's a 350 I believe. So here is the pump for the jack, and we'll have to connect it onto the aircraft jack right here. And of course you want to make sure it's screwed down good and tight. The nose gear itself has the jack point right here on the bottom, and we can adjust the screw on top of the ram on the jack. So we don't use, okay, that's as much as it goes right there. So everything else after this will be done by pumping the jack. These pumps have 3 position. This is completely closed so it doesn't spill while you're traveling and tipping it and whatever else. Vent right here. You don't turn it to the other one unless you're opening it to actually put fluid in. Got a knob here. Close that. Now it doesn't bypass and it will pump. And now we're gonna pump this handle. And as we pump, this is a multi-stage pump. So the first pump, things will move pretty quick to take up. Now we've taken up against the jack plate. So now the pumps get stiff and they barely move anything because of the different stages of the pump. And now it's at a low movement. Oh, it just aligned itself. Alright, now we're up good and hard. Alright. That's what this sticker means here. Up to this point, the first stage, you can only go up to 350 psi. The next stage, 400 psi. And you can go all the way to 10,000 if necessary to lift the aircraft. This jack will hold 25 tons, so 50,000 pounds. I don't think we're gonna, well, I'm not sure about how the hydraulic step up, step down works on this, but anyways, it's gonna be stiff. I don't know if I've ever actually had it go completely into the second stage, but we'll see. And it is stiff to pump. We just gotta go until those nose wheels are off the ground. So thankfully these are nose wheels. It's pretty quick to get them up off the ground. So now we're gonna follow the maintenance manual for whatever we need to do for the hardware to remove the nose wheel. Which we'll be cutting the safety wire, pulling these bolts, unscrewing the nut, and then pretty much just come off. So every aircraft part you're ever going to install has to come with this Form 8130, which identifies that it is an airworthy part that you can install on an aircraft. And you always want to check that tag first before you install the part, really before you even start the job, because if this has the wrong paperwork or it doesn't have paperwork, you can install it on the airplane, but you cannot return it to service because you do not prove that it was an airworthy part, unless it was something you were personally overhauling, in which case you would generate a tag, which also can work in that place. There's a whole bunch of FARs about it, but the big thing is when I'm getting something like this shipped in from by the customer and I have to install it, I need to verify that this part is correct. So I'm going to look for part number, and there's different part numbers. The assembly part number can always be different, but the big thing is serial number. And we're looking for a DO555, and we have right here on the wheel a DO555. So we'll put this one on. So we got our bolts out, like I said. Put them someplace we know we won't lose them. Socket goes on, and the ratchet and there we go, coming off. We got our nut off, and then it's just up to what it takes to pull the wheel off, and you want to be very careful when you do it. You don't want to damage these threads, and as you can see, the bearing has to slide over them, so gonna have to grab this with 2 hands, but it's a straight pull, making sure we don't damage any of those. If we had a thread protector, I would put it on, but I've done this enough times I know how to do it without smashing everything. So there's our axle, the bearing. It's a shield to help water stay out of the bearing. Got a lock ring here to keep the nut from spinning against the bearing and trying to unscrew it. And our wheel. Got to make sure we pull off the inside bearing as well. Come on, there we go. And there we go. Bearings are off. New wheel will have new bearings. There's a rubber seal inside of that cap right here. This is to help with when water is getting picked up by the other wheel. It helps sling it away from the bearing so it doesn't get into it. So the next thing, of course, is wipe it down. Look it all over for cracks, damage, galling, anything that would be evidence that the bearings haven't been happy and they've been wearing. There's a spacer here, and if that comes off for any reason, you'll notice one side is flat like that and the other side has a chamfer, and that right there is got a curve to it, so make sure the chamfer goes against that or else it will cut into the axle. So we get that. We're going to get some grease and we're going to make sure it's all nice and covered, because grease is our protection against corrosion. Makes everything go a whole lot easier coming together and going apart and turning. So it's all back on, and you always want to be careful putting it on. Bearings don't always fit nicely. Don't beat on them. Keep working them. They should go on with just finger pressure. You shouldn't ever use a hammer. You might use the wheel to kind of bump them, but you got to be careful because you can ding up the race, the flat on the axle that the race sits on, and you also don't want to nick the axle itself because that is a stress riser, and there is a lot of weight riding on these things, and stress riser can cause that axle to actually fail. You don't want that. And then here we have the lock ring. As you see, there's a little tab inside of there, and it's going to be a slot somewhere in these threads, right on the bottom, and that tab is going to go right in there, and that will allow this, yeah, you can see it's locked, it's not turning, and that is what we want to know that it's seated where it should be. The nut, as we run it in, is going to pull everything together and tighten it down. There's 2 torques you do. The first one is higher. On this aircraft, I believe it's either 30 or 60 foot-pounds, and then the next one is half of that. That's the actual running one, which is the tension that's going to be held on these bearings. The first one is to seat everything, pull it in tightly together, get all the play out of everything. You back it back off to 0, then you go tighten again. The second one is the one that sets a tension so that the wheel can't move on the axle like that. You don't want that to happen for sure. Or even there be any play or slop, because that will ding up your axle, ruin your bearings, ruin the races, and give everybody a really bad day if the wheels don't actually just come off the aircraft, which would be even worse. So that's the way you'll know everything is adjusted correctly, is when you've done that take-up torque, the initial torque. Almost any wheel you get in from an overhaul place is going to have something like this. It's just a threaded shaft, 2 wing nuts, a couple plates, and it just holds all those free-floating bearings in the wheel, holds everything together, and keeps it all together so you don't get like rust on the races or anything like that, or rust on the bearings. One other thing you'll notice on these wheels is they're lopsided. There's this big lip sticking out of the side of the tire. Also on here on this. That is actually a rain diverter. If there is deep enough water that they're really throwing a wake, or even just normal riding through water, that was actually specifically designed to help make sure that water didn't get thrown up into the engine. It's a particular angle they played with, they worked with. It helps to throw the water out enough that it should disperse enough that it won't cause a flame out. Because if you're landing, you're probably using a thrust reverser, and engine at a high power setting, there's low air coming in, and an increased amount of water going in the intake could very easily cause the engine to have a flame out if you weren't careful, or a pressure stall, or any other thing that's very unhealthy for an engine. So you want to make sure you're throwing as much of that in a wide dispersed pattern and not up into your engine. So if I had 3 hands, what I would show you is that you got to be turning the tire in the same direction that the nut is going to be turned. In this case, it's tightening towards the rear, until we hit the specified torque from the manufacturer and we stop. Don't keep going, don't click it twice, anything like that. This is a torque wrench. And then we'll back it off to 0. We'll set it to the running torque, which is half of the setting torque. And then we'll work at lining up these holes to be able to put the retaining bolts in and safety them. We'll be done with that one. On to the next one. Well, I hit my torque, but obviously that hole isn't lined up, so I'm going to have to keep going up with the torque wrench until I can thread a bolt into that hole or any of the others. There's a number all the way around, but once one of them lines up, the one opposite 180 degrees will also line up. I just have to hit it. And yes, there is a warning tag, and what this warning tag is telling you is this is only at a shipping pressure, which is often like 40 pounds. So before I put this back on the ground, I'm going to have to service it to the actual operating pressure. And my lock bolts are in. Now I just got to run safety wire and we can go on to the other wheel. Safety, top and bottom, there we go. One of the things you'll notice about this nose gear is it is pretty much vertically set into the aircraft. There are a few designs, usually on airliners, I can't think of any on corporate, where the nose gear is actually set at an angle coming down like this instead of a vertical one, much more of a lean forward. The trick with those, if you can use the nose wheel steering, which you'll need hydraulics for, if you turn these front wheels, the outboard wheel, which is the one that'll be on the outside of the turn, comes off the ground naturally, and you only turn on the inside wheel, and you can service the outside wheel without needing a jack. Just one of those little tips to keep in the back of your head. I've seen this on MD8s, DC9s. Can't think of any others. I think there is one other out there. I'm just not thinking